Small farmers in western Massachusetts, most of whom had normally been in the militia, were organized by a guy there named Thomas Shays, who was one of the officers of the militia during the war. He had been a real hero during the war. He had put his life on the line on several occasions, involved in several battles, including the Battle of Bunker Hill, which is one of the first main battles of the war. Shays was he's a veteran, a hero of the Revolution, and the leader of the militia. And it's the militia that actually has taken over the courthouse in Springfield and said, you can't come in. And that's the way they're going to prevent foreclosure of their property. They're just not going to let the legal process work. Well, this is a breakdown of law and order. A mob, in effect, has taken possession of the courthouse and prevented it from functioning its normal way. You can't do that. The normal procedure, when there's this rebellion like this, when somebody's doing this, is to send out local law enforcement. That's the way it works. That's why you have local law enforcement. In the town of Springfield, you've got a sheriff or whatever, whose job it is to maintain law and order. And he can't. He's just outgunned, outmanned by the rebels. When that happens, if local law enforcement can't do the job, you go to the state. You go to the state of Massachusetts, and the state of Massachusetts has what was then the militia. Today it's the National Guard. Our modern day National Guard is the modern version of the militias that we've talked about in this class. You go to the National Guard, and you send the troops in to do the job that the local law enforcement, the sheriff or whatever, cannot do. But state officials in Massachusetts hesitated to do that because they weren't sure if they could count on their militia to go after the rebels, because the rebels are the militia. They're the militia for Springfield in that area. And there's other militia units throughout the state that they could send in. But are these other militia units going to be reliable to fire on their fellow militiamen? Are they going to fire on a rebellion that's led by a hero of the Revolution, by Thomas Shays? Let's think about that one a little bit. So they didn't send the militia in. But if the militia can't do the job, then what you do is you go to the U.S. Army. When the militias are just outgunned, then you have the National Army. And they couldn't do that. And the reason they couldn't do that is pretty simple. There was no U.S. Army. And Congress couldn't have one. I mean, legally they could. The Articles of Confederation gave them the power to establish the Army. Fine. But how are you going to pay for it when you can't tax? So we've got a real situation there. This is a real crisis. We've got a breakdown of law and order, and we've got a situation where, in effect, a mob has taken over and is depriving people of their property. Governments are there, remember, to protect rights. Important rights: life, liberty, and property. And the government of Massachusetts can't do the job. The mob just has outgunned them. And there's no National Army to back it up. So maybe we got a problem here. Maybe we need to rethink the Articles. So when the convention started meeting in Philadelphia, 12 states sent delegates. Of the 8 states that had refused to participate at Annapolis, 7 of them had changed their mind. And we can't prove this, but it seems pretty obvious from the context and from things that were said that what really changed a lot of minds was Shays' Rebellion. And that convinced a lot of people that, hey, maybe these so-called Federalists are talking about something that we really need to deal with. Maybe we really do need to amend the Articles. So let's go to the convention at Philadelphia and start that process, start seeing where that goes. One state did not go. One state held out, refused to go, and that was, I like to ask classes if they could guess because it's kind of fun. It's Rhode Island. You know, Rhode Island, remember, is being run by the state legislature is controlled by a bunch of radical farmers, left-wingers, who are doing all these terrible things in the state of Rhode Island, and printing paper money, which everybody identifies as sort of legalized theft, and they like it. The legislature is running the state, and they like what they're doing. I mean, who wouldn't like it if you could print money and then enable you to pay your debts, and you just forget it. You just go to the state, get some paper money, pay your debts, and you're done. Well, that's a neat deal, and so the people of Rhode Island really liked it, and they were afraid, correctly, that probably one of the things that this convention is going to do is set it up so that states can't do that anymore. That's going to somehow prevent states from printing paper money and getting out of debt. So Rhode Island doesn't have anything to do with it, so they wouldn't send any delegates there. So the convention meets in Philadelphia in May of 1787, and they look at what they're up against, and they say, you know what? We're here to amend the Articles. We can't do it. I mean, the idea had been to assure everybody that they don't have anything to worry about. Well, that's true. But that means that you can't accomplish anything unless you can get all the states to ratify what you do, and we know damn well we're not going to get that. We know, first of all, that Rhode Island is not going to do anything that we approve. So right there, the whole idea is dead. It's dead before it even gets started. And the delegates from other states were warning, well, you know what? Our state legislature sent us. They agreed to go along with us. They agreed to send delegates to here. They're authorizing us to go, and they're paying our way. But they're very suspicious still of anything that we do. We think that if we take anything back to them, anything that we bring back to them, they're going to turn it down. I can't tell you all the states one at another. It's too complicated to look at every state. I do know that in North Carolina there was also a lot of resistance to what was going on. A lot of the farmers of North Carolina were seeing what was happening in Rhode Island. They said, hey, let's do that here. So North Carolina was sort of in almost the same spot that Rhode Island was. They're not there yet, but there are people in the state who want to move them there. There's farmers there who want to turn North Carolina into another Rhode Island. And the other states are saying, well, yeah, they sent us. Our legislature approved it, but they're not enthusiastic about it, and we don't think that anything that we'll do will be able to fly. So they decided, let's just forget about amending the Articles. We can't do it. It's not going to happen. So let's not even try. Let's just write a new Constitution, and we'll call this the Constitutional Convention. And we're going to drop it. We'll just start from scratch. Forget the Articles. Forget what we're supposed to be here to do. We'll just act on our own. We'll just decide we're going to go ahead and write a new Constitution. And let's not have it ratified by the state legislatures, because it's not going to happen. If we follow that policy that we'd had for the Articles, it's not going to work. So forget about it. Don't even talk about it, because it ain't going to happen. So let's have it ratified by not the states through their legislatures. Let's have it ratified by the people. Let's set it up so that the people will vote for representatives. We're not going to have a national referendum on this where we submit it to the whole people. That's not going to work. We're going to work through representatives, but we'll let the people elect representatives to special conventions and have these conventions then decide whether to ratify it or not, but to do it as representatives, not as the state legislature, but as representatives of the people. So this is going to be a constitution for the nation. It's not going to be a contract among the states. The Articles have been a contract among the states. They've been an agreement negotiated by the states to act together through Congress. And that's why it had to be ratified by each of the states. It's not going to be ratified by the states. It's going to be ratified by the people. And it's going to be then for a country. And it had been always a little bit unclear whether under the Articles it was a country. It really wasn't. It was 13 states. But we're going to make this one country, one nation, ratified by the people of the country as a country. So they decided that. And then they wimped out. Then they didn't follow through. Then they didn't do it thoroughly. And that's going to lead to constant problems, which we have literally to today. This morning's newspaper has articles in there where there's arguments, there's issues, because in the United States today, literally today, maybe by the time you see this, if you see it later this week, there's going to be a big war over it. I don't know what's going to happen, because it's a big issue. Because, I mean, and I'll tell you what it is right now. You know, President Trump is trying to say he's the president. He's trying to have a policy about the virus for the whole country, because it's a country and he's the president. And then you've got state governors, such as Governor Newsom, and other governors who are saying, no, it's up to each state to decide what they're going to do about the virus. Well, this is a question. Are we a single nation or a federation of states? Do we have one national government that makes policies on what to do about the virus? Or do we have 50 state governors, each of which decides what to do in his or her state? Now, that's an issue right now. It's the morning paper. And literally at this moment, I don't even know what's happened, because I haven't seen it on the news for the last couple of hours. It may be going on right now. And it started back in Philadelphia in 1787. It's going on ever since. We never really made it clear exactly whether we were going to be a single nation or a federation of states. There's all kinds of issues in the United States today. The coronavirus has brought out this in a very dramatic way, in a very serious way. This is, of course, a huge problem for the country today, what to do about the virus. And there's a question whether we're going to have a national policy on it or state policies. And it's because we're ambiguous. We've always been unclear. We've always had this uncertainty about whether we're really a one nation or 50 states. In those days, 13. And on the one hand, we're not going to have state legislatures ratify this. It's going to be done as a nation. It's going to be done by the people rather than by state legislatures. And the ratification is going to be separate. It's not going to be done by state legislatures. It's going to be done by special conventions solely for the purpose of ratifying the Constitution. But we're going to do it by states. So they didn't make up their mind. They wouldn't do it one way or the other. Now, on the one hand, they're going to be a nation. On the other hand, there's still going to be 13 states, because ratification is going to be at the state level. And then they said, well, how many states? You know, the Articles of Confederation required all states to ratify. And we know that's not going to happen. So let's not even think about that. Let's think about what else is going to happen. Let's think about how many states do we think can ratify? Let's go around and say, if we think that our state, that the political situation in our state, we know what's going on in our state, do we think our state is going to ratify or not? And let's see, how many states do we think are going to ratify? And then they said, well, you know, they went through and they said, well, we think it's going to be maybe 9. We think 9 states, there's a sentiment, there's support for the idea of getting rid of the Articles, replacing with another constitution. And we think that in 9 states we'll get a ratification. Okay, that's what we think is going to happen. So let's make a rule then. Okay, the rule is it'll be ratified when 9 states ratify. Huh. That's the way they did it. So and where did they get the idea to do that? They just made it up. Where did they get the authorization to do that? They just made it up. They were there, but they were chosen by their state legislatures to go there and amend the articles. And they said, well, okay, we're here to amend the articles, but that won't happen. So we're going to do something else. We'll decide what we're going to do. We're going to write a new constitution, and we're going to say we're going to have special conventions in every state to ratify it, and we're going to say it becomes ratified when 9 of those conventions vote to ratify it. Oh, okay. So they made up these rules, and they're going to start over again. All right. So now they're going to say, okay, let's start doing this. Let's start having a constitution. Let's see. Anybody have any ideas? Any thoughts of how we're going to set up this new government? Well, the delegation from Virginia came up and they said, sir, we have a motion here we'd like to make. Oh, just a little footnote here. They chose a guy to be the presiding officer for the convention. He's going to be it's like the chairman who's going to call the meeting to order and say, motion, recognize so-and-so, the chair recognizes so-and-so, and any motions, any second of the motion, da-da-da. And they picked out a guy, obvious choice for the position, George Washington. So Virginia then presents a motion as itself of a plan for a whole new government. Virginia had there's a delegation from Virginia. It's headed by their governor. Edwin Randolph was the governor of Virginia at the time. He's the head of the delegation. And they've sort of been meeting privately. They would meet in their hotel rooms while the other guys were just starting to get ready and stuff like that. And they have drafted a complete plan for a new government. It's called, surprisingly enough, the Virginia Plan. And it was done by the whole delegation, and it was officially presented to the convention by Governor Randolph as the leader, the chairman of the committee from Virginia, or the chairman of the delegation from Virginia. But it was really the work of one of the members of the delegation, the youngest member of the delegation, a kid, probably the youngest person at the whole convention, and certainly the youngest member of the delegation. And it was really his work. The whole delegation had talked about it and they presented it, but he was the guy who really did it. And so this is the guy who really wrote out the first draft of the Constitution, and that was the basis of the one that we eventually adopted. And his name was James Madison. I like to call him Little Jim. He was called in his time, people called him Little Jim. They spelled it J-E-M. They didn't use the nickname Jim in those days. I like to do that because he was actually very little. He was a short man. He was only about 5'4", and very slight and slender and just so forth. So, and I like to call him that because that way I don't get to call many people little because I'm smaller than almost everybody. I was always the shortest kid in my class in school. And so when I'm taller than somebody, I like to brag about it, so I like to call him Little Jim. So Little Jim has drafted this, and it's presented to the convention as sort of like a first draft for the Constitution. And in our next lecture, we'll start by looking at the Virginia Plan.